Historians are very fond of telling about floods that constantly flood St. Petersburg. The flood is clearly recorded in the city chronicles, with all the small details. This phenomenon is described very well in the book St. Petersburg. 1,000 questions and answers were published back in 1974 year. A wonderful book that answers many interesting questions, and most importantly, it clearly describes the mechanisms of this natural phenomenon. Let me remind you again, the book was published in 1974 year. We read, in the 294 years, that the city stands on the banks of the Neva. It has repelled the fierce attacks of the sea element more than 300 times, and more than 280 times when the water level above the ordinary exceeded 100 centimeters. Already, in the year of the foundation of St. Petersburg, a flood occurred on the night of the 19th to the 20th of August. The water rose more than 2 meters. And 3 years later, in 1706 year, the residents of the young city witnessed an equally formidable natural disaster. Peter the Great reported about this flood in a letter from Menshikov. On the third day, the wind west-southwest caught up with such water, which they say did not happen. I had 21 inches on top of my mansions, and boats rode freely around the city and on the other side. However, it did not last long, for less than 3 hours, and it was very comforting to see that people were sitting on roofs and trees, as if during a flood. Wonderful letter. Peter is building a new capital on the marshes. And at the same time, these swamps are covered with floods of different strength, almost every year, but almost always the water level above the ordinary exceeded 150 centimeters. Now we need to explain what an ordinary is. Ordinar comes from the Latin ordinarius, that is, ordinary normal. The ordinary zero of the footstock, at water measuring posts, which records the long-term water level in reservoirs. Fluctuations in the level are counted above and below the ordinary, with an accuracy of up to a centimeter. 2 methods are used to calculate the water level in the Neva. In the first case, the starting point is the ordinary at the mining institute, in the other, the surface of the sea. The water level in the Neva is compared with the average position of the Baltic Sea. To do this, the water level in the Gulf of Finland near Kronstadt is taken. The Kronstadt foodstock can be seen near the bridge over the bypass canal. Here in the stone tower, there is a well communicating with the Gulf of Finland. A special float rests on the surface of the water in the well. It is connected to a mareograph, a self-recording device for determining the height of the water level. From the zero of the Kronstadt foodstock, which determines the average level of the Baltic Sea, absolute heights are calculated in our country. The depths of the sea are given to it on all our maps. In short, 2 points are used to determine the height and rise of water in St. Petersburg, the zero of the Kronstadt foodstock, and the ordinary of the mining institute, which is 11 centimeters above zero of the Kronstadt foodstock, and shows the average level of the field. Now we turn to this engraving, and marvel at the foresight of Peter the Great. Here's a look at this embankment, which rises a maximum of half a meter above the level of the Neva. Floods occurred every year, and in most cases, the water rose above the ordinary of the mining institute by more than 150 centimeters. This means that all these buildings go underwater for at least 1 meter every year. And this happened every year, so as we see, the stairs go straight to the second floor, because there is simply no drying swamps on the first floor. One might think that only a very narrow-minded person could design a city in such an unsuitable place with such gentle embankments. Well, let's not blame Peter. Most likely he is not to blame, since the city was built before him. Whoever designed the city, at first glance, he placed it in a very unfortunate place. Such an unsuitable place should be very much searched for. Firstly, the swamp and the lack of roads, and secondly, annual floods with a rise in water of more than 1.5 meters. And these are not my fantasies. Here in the book St. Petersburg, 1,000 questions and answers are clearly written. For 294 years, St. Petersburg has been flooded 300 times. Moreover, more than 280 times, the water level above the ordinary exceeded 150 centimeters. Now let's go back to the engraving of Collegium Avenue and just finish drawing 1 meter of water. The first floors of the building are flooded with water. I'm not talking about basements. And it happened every year. It is very strange that someone built the city in the most unsuitable place for this. Let's not blame the builders of the city, but look at this situation a little from the other side. As I have already said, historians are very fond of describing the St. Petersburg floods, but for some reason, they practically do not write about another interesting natural phenomenon. In 1910th year, the St. Petersburg River Yacht Club celebrated its 50th anniversary. A race on sailing ships was organized. 92 yachts from St. Petersburg, Finland, Riga and Revel signed up for it. The first stage of the race went great, but then a strong wind blew, blowing water from St. Petersburg. The water slowly and clearly began to move away from the shores. The race still took place, but the yachts were returning home already with a very fresh wind. It blew out 7 or 8 points at night. The prospect of holding a third race has disappeared. By noon, the water had moved away from the shore. For almost a kilometer, even the aces and schwertbots were completely dry. The yachts began to run aground and fall on their sides. The little dogs were running around on the shore and barking at the gone sea. The yachts were lying thieves. They inbound their guests to prop them up with logs, but the water left so quickly that many simply did not have time to do it. At the exit of the canal, a steamer was stranded, as always at this time, crowded with passengers. The fairways of the main St. Petersburg yacht clubs had depths of about 2 meters and a little. The water level dropped by more than a meter and even more on the rifts. So in the middle of the day, all 3 fairways were littered with yachts, sitting tightly on the ground and slowly lying on board. On watch, the fairway turned into a miserable trickle. The Racing Commission, which was supposed to monitor the weather and prohibit the yachts from leaving in time. Unlike ordinary fishermen, I could not foresee the theft of water, and now I got stuck in the Eleginsky fairway on a steam yacht myself. Roxana was sitting a little closer to Krestovsky Island. A passenger steamer was sitting on the Fox's Nose, on the Rez. Nearby, a large paddle steamer, also packed with passengers, was helplessly hammering on the sand with slabs. No one was able to approach the steamers. Small boats did not risk going out the muzzle by 8 points, and there were very few boats. Peasants from Dubki, Lakta, from the old village, tried to approach the emboldened ships on horseback, but the horses were stuck in the clay and ore. None of the old-timers remembered such a big drop in the water level. It caused a lot of trouble to the city as well. From the exposed sewer pipes, there was an incredible ringing. About the weak water supply at the power plant. Moika and Fontanka were shallowed, passenger traffic on them stopped. Having blown his 3 days, the Nordost friend began to subside. The sea, as if having made fun of us, began to slowly return home, flooding the yachts lying on their sides. The whole day was spent in the removal of ships from the shoal, in the rise of the yaks sunk at this tide. As we can see, in 1910th year, due to a change in the wind direction, the water level in the Neva and the Marquis Puddle fell so much that the peasants even tried to drive up to the stuck steamers on horseback. At first glance, this is a unique event that has not been repeated. But the residents of St. Petersburg are well aware of this situation. When a strong northeasterly wind blows, the water level in the Neva falls. On the 5th of October, 2016 of the year, due to a strong easterly wind, the water level in the Neva fell below zero and remained below zero for 20 days. All the waterways of the city have exposed their shores. Bypass Canal, Gryboidov Canal, Moika, Buckle, and Fontanka. Although the water did not fall to the level of 1910th year, but it managed to show us something interesting. Here's a look at this photo. Here we see how the real embankment of St. Petersburg has been exposed, and at what depth it is located. These boards, sticking out of the water, are the lining of the first canals of St. Petersburg. Here it is, the real level of St. Petersburg. The city was built on the basis of this level of the Neva River. What the divers showed in the Neva River, on the Proto-Civilization Channel, namely, an incomprehensible wooden fence in the Neva River near the Palace embankment in the 2016 year. It was possible to carefully examine without divers just going down to the bottom of the channel. Now let's move on to this photo. It is evident by the fact that the level of the old pavement is visible, and the built houses are visible. You can see how much the houses rise above the level of the old embankment, and they are quite logically built. If this is the real level of the city, then why did the water in the Neva rise in the 18th century? To do this, you need to understand the mechanism of St. Petersburg floods. And this is what is written in the book St. Petersburg, 1,000 Questions and Answers. For 2 centuries, the opinion has prevailed that the main cause of floods is the Neva, which, with a strong westerly wind, delays its rapid flow and overflows its banks. But this reasoning was wrong. Calculations have shown that the Neva's own runoff can raise the water level from 2.5 to 3.5 meters above the ordinary in at least 6 to 8 hours, while in case of flooding, it happens in 2 hours. It was only in the first half of our century that scientists managed to come up with the correct solution to this issue. It is established that, due to the existing laws of atmospheric circulation on the globe, cyclones most often move from west to east. They are usually accompanied by strong winds. If cyclones cross the Baltic Sea from southwest to northeast, then its direction coincides with the axis along which the sea stretches. Winds drive water to the throat of the Gulf of Finland, forming a swelling on the surface, spreading in the form of a free wave. Usually at the beginning of the height of 40-60 centimeters. When a wave moving at a speed of 50 kilometers per hour or more begins to pass through a narrow and shallow part of the bay, its height and speed increases. She runs the entire Gulf of Finland in 7 to 9 hours. With a huge pressure wave, sometimes reaching a height of 5 meters, rolls into the Neva Bay and at the mouth of the Neva, causing a rapid rise of water. Due to the fact that someone chose a unique place for the construction of St. Petersburg, as if in the neck of a funnel, this city was subjected to floods every year before the construction of the dam, provoked by a wave from the Gulf of Finland. On the other hand, with a strong easterly wind, the Neva and the Marquis Puddle become milder, and old embankment canals appear. Also, thanks to the historical excavations on Vasilyevsky Island, we can find out at what level the blind area of the Petrovsky time was located. But we have established, since the brick-blind area of Petrovsky time has been preserved, we have also established the geodetic mark of Vasilyevsky Island for Petrovsky time, meter 57, according to the Baltic system. If that means anything to you, but right now we have a city at the 280 mark, that is, 1 meter 57. We have a meter 60 is considered a flood, you know, and everything, and the entire Russian island, is immediately covered with water. As we can see, even serious archaeologists say that the paving stones are located at a height of 157 centimeters, and the flood floods the city by 160. So the whole city was flooded at least once a year. It's very strange, the annual floods, the city is constantly drowning. Who chose such a good place? This situation can only be explained from a climatic point of view. See how the situation developed at the end of the 17th century. People came to these places and laid a big city here. Today we will not find out who it is, let's just say an unknown people. The places here are not particularly fertile and friendly, and if southwesterly winds were blowing here, which would constantly cause flooding, then a reasonable person would hardly start building a city here. But if we imagine that before the 18th century, there was another wind rose in these places, then the situation simply changes dramatically. There are many observations from different bloggers that it was in the 18th century that the climate changed dramatically. A cold snap came, furnaces appeared in houses and churches, the shape of roofs changed. Additional vestibules appeared in mansions and entrances of houses of the 18th century. Now almost no one is arguing about the global cooling of the 18th century. So, if the temperature has changed, then most likely the wind rose has also changed. And therefore, at the time of the construction of St. Petersburg, there was not a southwesterly but a northeasterly wind blowing here, which in 1910 and in 2016 caused the shallowing of the Neva. Also, the atmospheric pressure was higher, the sun was constantly shining, and anticyclones ruled these expanses, which also led to a decrease in the level of the Baltic Sea and the Gulf of Finland. These two factors, the high atmospheric pressure and the prevailing east wind, are quite enough to lower the level of the field by more than a meter. It will also lead to the almost complete drainage of the Marquis Puddle, which happened in 1910 year. And most importantly, even with such a not very large lowering of the Neva and the absence of floods caused by a surge wave from the Baltic, we can build St. Petersburg in the same way as it is painted on ancient engravings. That is, to put houses on a not very high bank, because there is nothing to be afraid of, there are no annual floods, and the level is unstable. Of course, even in such a climatic scheme, the wind could sometimes change and still catch up with waves from the Baltic. Let's say this could happen once every 20 years, that is, very rarely. Drainage of canals is as rare as it is now, and people in the 17th century took care of this. Everyone knows that today St. Petersburg is protected from floods by a dam built in the 20th century. But few people have heard that this dam goes along the old cuts, that is, along wooden boxes filled with granite waves. This is what is written in the book Kronstadt, The City of Sea Glory by Schlendova. This book is not online. It was kindly provided to me by Valerie, a resident of Kronstadt. We read the dam built 1856th year. When pumping water out of the ship-passing structure, the hydraulic builders came across a number of huge rectangular boxes made of logs and filled with stones. The length of each is 6 meters, the height is 3 meters. Several dozen of such structures stretched out in a solid chain. The ripples were erected in the middle of the last century, when 27 kilometers of continuous barriers across the northern fairway were planned. And on the shallows in front of the southern forts, erect a closed cutting barrier 12 kilometers long. The ripples are well preserved, so we can assume that there is already one dam in the bay, only underwater. Its crest does not reach the sea surface by a few tens of centimeters. Schlendova writes that the dam of Resi began to be built in 1856th year. But if you look at the plan of Kronstadt from 1855th year, look at the number 20. Schematically drawn 2 lines, signed, this place, modestly Kronstadt Shoal, is very smooth, neat 2-lane shoal. So I think it's not a shoal, it's a 17th century dam that protected the city from rare floods at that time. I would sell a separate video. I will specially go to Kronstadt again, and together with Valerie we will study this interesting structure, which according to the official version, only began to be built in 1856th year, but it already exists on the plan of 1855th year. Here's a look at what we get at the end of the 17th century. It is unknown by what people. A large city was founded on the banks of the Neva. The climate was different in these places, anticyclones prevailed, and the east wind constantly blew, which altogether led to a lower water level in the Neva. The absence of floods in general contributed to the construction of a large city. In place of the Marquis Puddle, there was a small chain of lakes stretched along the Neva fairway. A network of forts and a dam, combined into one wall, prevented rare floods. The Neva riverbed, running through the Marquis Puddle, was deep and allowed ships to approach directly to the city. In general, it was a wonderful, well-planned city. But in the 18th century, everything changed. A cold snap came that could accordingly change. The wind rose in these places. The wind became mainly southwesterly and began to catch up with the Baltic water at the mouth of the Neva. Anticyclones were replaced by cyclones, which also contributed to the rise of the water level in the Gulf of Finland. All this led to constant flooding, and that is why the old canal embankments had to be raised by 2 meters. The photo of the 2016 year clearly shows how much the embankments have risen. Petersburg was built by literate people in the right place. They simply could not foresee the climate catastrophe of the 18th century. That's it. Watch my channel.